Hey there, and welcome to another Dave Does. Today we are going to be finding out the history of Indonesia in 12 minutes or less. Now, this is originally, I think, from a lot of this is pulled out of a video that was an hour and a half. And someone's decided to try and do a 12-minute version. I'm going to see how much information this is going to really give me. This is, I'm sure, going to be a very much an abridged version of the history. And then what I want to do is, if you want to let me know in the comments down below of particular moments in history for Indonesia that you'd like me to kind of understand more about, get into the deep dive into from this video, and then we'll do kind of maybe some other videos where we check some more information out. If you'd like me to find out more about your country, Indonesia, for those that are watching, if you're not from Indonesia and you're watching this, then if you'd like me to find out about other countries, let me know in the comments down below. Please do like, share, subscribe, click the bell icon. Let's bring up the screen. Let's give it a bit more, should we give it a bit more width? Yeah, let's do that today. Move out the way a little bit, just so you can see what I'm looking at. Yeah, let's go.
Today, Indonesia is probably most commonly known around the world for one place, Bali. An exotic and romantic...
Very much. I wouldn't have guessed that. I knew of Bali, of the name Bali, but didn't know it was Indonesia. I just had heard of Bali. But now I know of Indonesia. It's not necessarily the place. I would have been Jakarta, Java. Just because of things like Alip Ba Ta. So yeah, it's just not quite what I would have thought. But yes, Bali is probably the most well known as far as tourist holiday destinations, stuff like that. I would have guessed that one.
Vacation spot. So many people view Bali as the representation of Indonesia as a whole. But what about the rest of the nation? How did that one island and the rest that make up the entire...
So interesting just seeing the Indonesian sort of country just so spread out on all these little islands, when you got the United Kingdom is just like this one little blob that we've got, tiny.
...entirety of Indonesia come to be what they are now. Where did the history of Indonesia begin?
Let's get to it.
Like
Let's see what's happening.
Malaysia, Indonesia can trace its first signs of modern human life all the way back to about 40,000 years ago. Although there is also archaeological evidence suggesting that 40,000 years may be an underestimate, and other ancestors of today's humans may have been present in the region as long as 1.9 million years ago.
So we get into this whole thing about civilizations, because of course we look at all the big temples in different areas like the Mayans and stuff like that in the South American continent. So it makes us think we're probably the second run of the human evolution on this planet, because where did these advanced civilizations go unless there was some sort of natural disaster on this planet that took out the previous planet. Now the problem is they can't see any evidence of it, but then it doesn't explain where all these civilizations who were advanced suddenly disappeared, and then we just went back to starting again almost. So we went to like the Mayans, who went from big sort of what's it called, Pikachu, not the Pokemon, but they went from having that kind of big grand temples and stuff like that to living back into huts again. So what happened? I still haven't got to my head around that one. But yeah, let's keep going.
Either way, the earliest reliable evidence of a sophisticated civilization in current-day Indonesia dates back to only about 400 BC. With the discoveries of Indian trade goods in the region and inscriptions found in West Java and eastern Kalimantan, it is also believed that trade with China would have been concurrent with the trade between the Indonesian archipelago and India.
So they're saying 400 BC, so they're talking 2,500 years ago. I'm sorry, human beings, Indonesia got to be older than 2,500. But it has to be, I'd say it has to be longer, but the fact that there's so much tectonic activity on there is the chance that civilizations have just been churned quite a lot, unfortunately. I don't think it was settled. People from other parts of the continent down onto those, unless the land mass has sunk down, and we obviously lost some of the population that way. But I'm sure it's more than 2,500.
Commerce with these particular foreign nations would have also brought the religions of Buddhism and Hinduism to the islands, beginning or contributing to the outside influence on the region. Jumping ahead to the 7th century, The powerful trade-oriented Srivijaya Empire, originating from the island of Sumatra, flourished from the Malay Peninsula down to Java. Despite their remarkable success over multiple centuries, the Buddhist Empire of Srivijaya faced its decline after the Chola Empire from India seized their Sumantran territory of Palembang and apprehended their king in 1025.
I find it interesting about all these different empires that grew up, because obviously we had the British Empire as well, and you just see that what you find is no one is big enough to actually take over all these countries and then hold them. They may hold them for 100 years, etc., but they eventually have to let them go because there's just no way of governing and maintaining over that sort of vast distances. But they constantly just expanded, and I think that's something we can learn quite clearly, that sort of thing doesn't work, and hopefully we'll never get to the stage where we get countries thinking that they can invade and take over other countries ever again. But we fingers crossed that is the case.
From that point on, the Srivijaya Empire essentially collapsed, making room for the Hindu kingdom of the Majapahit Empire. Founded in 1292, the Majapahit Empire rose to dominate the modern-day Indonesian region throughout the 13th and 14th centuries, prospering through trade as the Srivijaya Empire.
See, in this little sentence, it's gone from 700 to 1400. So that's 700 years. So it's made it sound like it was quite a quick change, but you're still talking 700 years of change. So it's not like it happened overnight. It progressed. It's just a progression.
Had done before them. Still, just as their predecessors, the Majapahit Empire hit a wall and began a rapid downfall. Theirs came after the death of one of their leaders, Gajah Mada, in 1364, and the following death of the king Hayam Wuruk in 1389. Leading up to this time, the Islamic faith found its way to the archipelago and began to really take hold over the ensuing centuries. Many different lesser-known sultanates found success throughout the islands as a result, some even outlasting the dominion of the Majapahit Empire. As these kingdoms continued to grow trade in and out of the region, European powers became attracted to the spice market that it offered. The first of such nations to arrive in modern-day Indonesia were the Portuguese and the Spanish in the 16th century. While Spain did attempt to exert some dominance in the Maluku Islands, also known as the Spice Islands, their authority in any part of the Indonesian archipelago was short-lived, due to contesting efforts of Portugal and later the Dutch and British. The Portuguese were initially triumphant in the Malay Peninsula, capturing Malacca.
So I like how the fact that you've just got like Spain, Portugal, Danish, and then talk about the English, all just going over there going, we're going to claim this, we're going to claim this. It's like, you have no right to claim it. You don't live there. You don't just go over there and go, we're going to claim it and we're going to rule this and we're going to take over your spices and stuff like that, because that's what we do. We're bigger, stronger powers. And you're like, no, the people that live there, that's their stuff. Just stop stealing from them. Cheeky buggers.
Malacca in 1511. From there, they aimed their sights towards the Spice Islands, beginning their bid to take control of the spice trade in 1512. While they had some levels of success, they were fairly quickly pushed out through the arrival of the Dutch by the 17th century. In terms of the colonial powers, the Dutch were surely the most prominent intruder into the Indonesian islands. The first Dutch expedition set off for the archipelago in 1595 under the command of Cornelius de Houtman, and dropped anchor at the shore of West Java. Around this time,
okay, so we're already at 800 years from the start when we talked about it.
Control trade between the Dutch Republic and the nations throughout the Indian Ocean. The Dutch East India Company was given a significant amount of autonomy by the Dutch government, allowing them to dominate trade throughout the East Indies and keep their competitors, notably the British and Portuguese, at bay. While the original focus of the company was to maintain commercial authority and prosperity, they began to shift their attention as they took control of Java and its neighbors. During the 17th century,
it's it's quite small growth when you talk about what they've sort of claimed lands-wise. So they've only claimed small sections of land, but probably in key parts of land, I'm guessing.
The company made a gradual transition from a leading sea and trading power to more of a colonial-type establishment, after centering themselves in the fortified port of Jakarta, Batavia, or modern-day Jakarta. Working to gain more jurisdiction throughout the Indonesian islands, the Dutch East India Company was also able to capture Malacca from the adjacent Malay Peninsula in 1641. When the 18th century came around, though, the company began to struggle with
you really don't think about as much about how much conquering, land grabbing there was, because was it as simple as literally you just got to an area with your ships and your troops, got them off and bombarded a town, got your people in there, and then they're like, right, well, we control it now. That's it. There's no kind of, we've got our people in there, we're holding it, and we still do hear about things like that today. Not quite as much, but it's still just seeing that mentality of land grabbing. But I suppose we have video games now, like things like Empire Earth and stuff like that, and Age of Empires and stuff like that, and where that is your thing. You just send your troops in, you capture the town, you put your flag in, it's your town now. We even have like paintball games called Capture the Flag. Once you capture the flag, the base is yours. It's just, you shouldn't be able to do that.
Corruption, conflict, and a slow collapse into bankruptcy, which resulted in the Dutch government revoking their charter and seizing all of their possessions in 1799.
Sounds like I mean, again, they talked about it there, but they talked about it like in quite a short period of time. But again, that's like, was it from 1300 they went from to 1789. So you're talking 400 years. So it's a significant chunk of time that's been invested in there. It's not like it's what, 5-6 lifetimes.
1800. The Dutch East Indies was founded, made up of what would later become Indonesia, but for the time being served as the new Dutch colonial administration in the archipelago. This establishment grew over the 19th and part of the 20th century, although some ups and downs, such as the Javanese War from 1825 to 1830,
Javanese
War,
War, okay,
victory did exist. Also, in 1825, the Dutch captured Palembang, the former territory of the Sriwijaya Empire. During this period, the Dutch also settled disputes and clashes with Aceh, Lombok, and Sulawesi, and continued to expand.
What's wrong with the Dutch? Seriously, stop invading places.
Colonization, the people of the Indonesian islands were treated vastly unfairly. As Dutch priorities shifted more towards agriculture, the local farmers were mandated to set aside 20% of their own property in order to grow crops for the Dutch to export, such as pepper, sugar, cinnamon, tea, and coffee.
Sure, the Indonesian people love the Dutch. Jesus.
By the 1870s,
what's wrong with them?
The colony moved to a free market system and began to form private plantations, although the local people were still not truly treated justly. Finally, at the very start of the 20th century, the Dutch installed a new system in order to promote the welfare of the archipelago's locals, known simply as the ethical policy.
Right, so what's the ethical policy?
This program brought about changes such as the construction of new schools in the region, government reforms that allowed more autonomy for the local officials, and the opportunity for some of the indigenous people to become more educated and learn more about the Western world. Even
so basically teach them about other countries.
Not every local was impacted, and therefore many people on the island still felt oppressed by the colonial authority. Over time,
not surprised.
These feelings of resentment.
There's a tiny little bit of Portugal down there. Yeah, I mean, problem is no matter even if you go there and you build schools and stuff, you're still saying, well, we're still taking 25% of your food, and we're still telling you what to do and stuff like that. It's not. Yeah, it's just what's wrong with you Dutch people at the time, anyway.
Culminated in nationalist movements and a push for ultimate independence. Unfortunately for the people of the archipelago, the fight for freedom was swiftly interrupted by the intrusion of the Japanese during World War II. At first, the locals were not completely displeased by what they saw as a liberation from their Dutch oppressors. When the Japanese occupation of the region...
So I'm guessing Japan obviously occupied that one from a military standpoint for the war partially resources, but also from a locational point of view, it's a very well spread out, so useful for launching ships and aircraft, I guess, from those areas.
Began, they were quick to win favor from the Indonesian people, doing so through their use of natives for administrative positions, unlike the Dutch and their willingness to support Indonesian nationalists. The successful strategy was only temporary, though, as the Japanese opted to use the Indonesian islands in whatever form best suited them during the war, which drew some disapproval from a number of locals. Still, the relationship between the Japanese and natives was not horrible, and as the Axis power began to face defeat in the World War, they threw their support even further behind the Indonesian independence movement. During the latter half of 1944, the Japanese declared their goal of creating a self-governed East Indies, which was later confirmed in August of 1945, when Terauchi Hisaichi, commander of Japan's Southern Expeditionary Army Group, summoned Muhammad Hatta and Sukarno, two Indonesian independence movement leaders, and informed them that Japan intended to make an immediate transfer of independence. The two nationalist men announced Indonesia's independence, declaring it an independent republic.
Okay, so the quick question I've got here. So this was, I know obviously we've done Independence Day, we've talked about it a little bit on the channel, we did a video about Independence Day. And I'm not talking about the movie, I'm talking about National Independence Day for Indonesia, 1945. Now, initially I've talked about, I'm sure people had commented about how it was like a big upheaval for fighting for your independence, whereas this video doesn't seem to make it feel like this way. It feels like it was a case of that the island was oppressed, and actually the Japanese, because they were losing the war and were pulling back, decided to give the country back. So it feels like in this case, it feels like it wasn't so much that the Indonesian people had fought for the independence. Although it has said there in a couple of comments that they weren't happy with the Japanese occupation in some sections. Just wanted to clear that up. I think there'd be probably some a good thing to delve into more detail about independence and how Indonesian independence was won. So I think that might be a good video to go into a bit more detail on.
Once word was out of the Japanese surrender to the Allied forces on August 17, 1945. The proclamation of an independent republic was not quite so simple, though, and sparked a series of clashes between the Indonesians and the colonizing forces.
So this could actually be the case where I was thinking about where the battle was fought, because obviously the Japanese have said, well, we get independence, and then the Dutch East Indies have come back and gone, yeah, we're having that back now, thank you very much. This might be what you were talking about in a previous conversation, a comment before.
Forces of both the British and Dutch. The British were less compelled to fight back, eventually withdrawing as the Dutch stepped in to try and retake their former possession. After repeated failures, unsuccessful police actions, and growing condemnation from the far west, such as the US, at long last, in the final weeks of 1949, the Dutch recognized...
So it took 4 years, so that's the fighting piece, so that's what we were referring to in the previous video, so that makes sense. So yeah, it was 1949, 1945, so 45 was where the Japanese said about the independence, and then obviously they've had to fight for 4 years with the stupid British people. Sorry for my previous ancestors, and the Dutch East Indies fighting to try and take back what they thought was theirs, which wasn't, because it's none of their business, they don't live there.
Indonesia. The following years marked a time of political and constitutional development, accompanied by agricultural and economic ups and downs as well. Beginning first as a parliamentary democracy, subsequently following what then-President Sukarno called a guided democracy, started in February of 1957. The republic then fell into the hands of a dictator, former General Suharto, in 1966.
Well, that's a really long terms for a president. So, I mean, I don't know. I guess there's no real control. I mean, it's 68 to 98, so 30 years he was in charge. I mean, Americans, you can, but every 4 years you get to a vote, but I think you can only do a maximum of 2 terms. Same for us for Prime Minister. You can't be in power for so many terms, so it's 30 years with a dictator in control. Don't know. What's people's thoughts on that? I think that's a little bit long time for someone. I should think people should be allowed to be in power for that long.
Before finally returning to a democracy as of 1999. Today, Indonesia is still growing and developing as an independent nation, and an overall population of roughly 273.5 million people
big population.
in 2020. The Republic of
Sure, that's more than the
Indonesia is
UK.
now led by their 7th president, President Joko Widodo of the PDIP, or Indonesian Democratic Party of Struggle.
Interesting. Oh, there's a video about how England was formed. Maybe I should find out about that. How much of it do I actually know? So I know a little bit about how the United Kingdom was formed, because it's something we did cover as in part of our history at school. Because basically the whole of England, especially when we talk about like our national parties like the BNP and stuff like that, where we talk about how people are like, keep British white, etc. And you're like, but you know that we were basically just conquered by every other country. So England is not pure English. We had Vikings came over and bred with the Nationals, the Celts. I was like, you know, you're all mixed blood. So I know I've got Irish and French blood in me. So there's probably a little bit of national blood in me. But if I go back 4 or 5 generations, I know that my ancestors came from Normandy, France. I haven't gone further back from that, but basically I come from French heritage, so I can't even sit there and say things like about I'm pure English. There's no such thing as pure English anymore. But anyway, we talk about the Indonesian story. So there was quite a big chunk of jumping from rulership. So obviously Indonesia was ruled or conquered is probably a better way of putting it, by different territories. So obviously older nations. And then we had the Dutch East Indies was the biggest period of time of colonialism. Then Japan came along, took it over. And I'm wondering how that was quite a quick change from Japan just taking it over, and the Dutch just seemed to leg it and get out of there. I'm intrigued. That's one thing I'd like to know a little bit more about, maybe, is how the Dutch didn't seem to kind of want to push back on that one and try and hold that line. Or did they? Did they put up a big fight on that one? Because I mean, the Japanese military machine was a large military machine, but I think just spread out too much once the Americans got involved in the war as well. So it became too much of a battle with the English fighters going off against him, because we had the English and the French, and I guess the Dutch were in. Where did the Dutch sit in the war? I'd have guessed they would have been on the Allied nation side. I guess. No, I think I wouldn't put them in the Germans. So, anyway, more to find out about the history, and I'm intrigued to do some more. So, if you want me to check and look into any more details of ones, I definitely would like to try and understand more about that fight for independence after the Japanese left and the Dutch East Indies tried to come back in, and the Indonesian fight. That one, I'd like to maybe get a bit more detail on that one. We can do a video on that, but let me know if you want me to do it. As always, if you like the video, please do subscribe, click the bell icon, like and share, and that, of course, is how Dave does it.